Cory. So actually, you gave us some flack because CoinDesk published that most influential list, and you said you want to highlight some of Bitcoin's accomplishments. So, you had that chance. You wrote an article for us on the most important developments in Bitcoin in 2022 with a new opinion piece on CoinDesk.com. Everyone should check it out. So if folks should take away one thing this year, what should it be?
It's so interesting because it's not that I don't actually see the perspective of the folks at Consensus Magazine. So it was their editorial team and staff that kind of put that together. Obviously, I think, if you and George and a few others at CoinDesk had more input or any input at all, I think there would have been some more, Bitcoin emphasis on a list like that. But it is kind of interesting because I think the takeaway is that Bitcoin really is it is decentralized, and it is something where it's much more about developments overall in the community versus individual people doing things. So it's the story that we're coming up on 14 years of TikTok next block every 10 minutes. Bitcoin keeps on marching along and doing exactly what it was supposed to do without having to completely redo things or fix things or like completely tear it apart and create a new coin and hard fork and things like that, right? So I think that's kind of the main story. It's been an incredible year of developments on the Lightning Network, which is sort of the layer 2 scaling layer of Bitcoin payments. So a ton going on there. I really suggest taking a look at it. Kudos to Ben Schiller for reaching out and suggesting that we do this. I know that the audio that got grabbed from the spaces where I joined got clipped and left off the opening, where I lent kudos to you and the other folks at CoinDesk that have done great reporting and really tried to, reach across the aisle and helping the audience broadly understand that there's Bitcoin and there's crypto, and that these things, while there is some shared infrastructure and some shared media, they're very, very different undertakings and very different asset classes.
We do actually have a question from George Kaludis, you mentioned, and he was asking, how people or companies use Taro to bring anything to market yet, and maybe you could give a brief explainer of what Taro is.
Yeah, sure. So it's not my area of specialty. This is something that Lightning Labs has developed, and so it's essentially a way to bring more functionality. It's a protocol for bringing additional functionality and options for building interesting things, leveraging Bitcoin. So I think probably the main use case that seems to be on everybody's minds these days is dollar-backed stablecoins, and I think they have plans to be able to bring a dollar coin that gets transferred over Lightning using the Taro protocol. So that seems to be the kind of dual use case that they're pushing forward on.
Mm-hmm. Any response to Sam Bankman-Fried's extradition plans? So far, we're seeing no reaction from Bitcoin. But before the collapse of FTX, you were calling it out early on. So what are your thoughts now? Yeah,
well, I realized I want to be very clear that this is a Bitcoin orange shirt and not an orange jumpsuit in honor of Sam being taken to jail. So I just want to be clear on that. But yeah, it's nice to see some justice potentially being served on one of these crypto scams. And this was obviously a very large one. And I think it's been the ripple effects of this going through the ecosystem, I think, will be a warning, and I think will be felt for a long, long time because of the regulatory reaction that's likely to come down because of this. I think the chances of crypto being overseen by the CFTC instead of the SEC, where maybe there was some momentum toward that earlier in the year, that seems completely stopped dead in its tracks. And it looks like, the vast majority of these, centrally controlled crypto securities will be regulated by the SEC going forward. And I think this kind of shone a light on it and made it clear that legislators, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, that's kind of the fair playing field thing to do, unless you want to deregulate all securities and get rid of the SEC completely. that's probably where it'll end
Well,
up.
you have a pretty good track record in terms of calling folks out this year, Cory. First, it was Do Kwon. That was early on. Then it was Alex Mashinsky, and we did see Celsius filing for bankruptcy. And then you started railing against SBF. And, you and I thought that was a bit of a long shot at, I thought they were well capitalized. They had a lot of investors. But again, we see the downfall of FTX right now. And now you are calling out Binance, the largest crypto exchange in the world. And so, I mean, that's a difficult, also a difficult thing to prove, because they sustained $6 billion worth of outflows last week, they said, in 72 hours. They're still processing withdrawals.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and we'll see. So I think it's just important to note. It's important to note where there are similarities and where there are differences, and then I think it's also important to just know, like, there's a lot that we just don't know about Binance, and that's by design. And I don't necessarily even fault them for, if you're going to try to build a crypto casino or a crypto exchange, and you want to make it accessible to the most people, you would by definition have this Byzantine network of offshore entities and just trying to get things done basically outside the realm of regulation. So, if that's the goal, what they've done, probably makes sense. I suspect that probably what ends up being the rot at the core of it probably is the BNB token. I think it is foundational to the growth of Binance, and that it really requires confidence in the price of that token and that it will continue to be valuable, because so many millions of people that use Binance use BNB, and they store wealth in it, and they use it for leverage. Binance cuts the rates for borrowing BNB. It's, I think, a 50% discount to borrow BNB versus anything else. So there's all these different things that they do over and over and over again to incentivize the holding of BNB. And yet, again, there was no volume whatsoever. Dylan LeClaire pointed this out, from BNB at $25 to BNB at $250 per coin. There was just no volume, hardly any at all. It was just marched up, essentially, probably by Binance themselves, by CZ and his friends marching the price up. And so there's just nothing but air in the chart, from basically below about $210 all the way down to 25. There's no historical volume, and it seems like this is just a confidence game to prop this thing up. So that will be really interesting if at some point BNB delevers. If that doesn't happen and they're able to maintain that, just by either maintaining confidence or just by propping it up with their own market makers, which operate on their own exchanges, just like Alameda operated on FTX, then it'll probably just be a slow regulatory bleed, and just, the usual criticism that you would have of Coinbase as well, which is that, you're an exchange that's trading all of these things that are actually securities and rug pulls and scams. And so that's the original sin and kind of the rot at the core of the business model that makes these two exchanges not long for this world.
What evidence could we possibly find, though, to show this is the case? In the case of FTT, the native token of FTX, CoinDesk revealed that the balance sheet of Sam Bankman-Fried's hedge fund just had a lot of FTT and was using that as collateral. We don't have that smoking gun document with Binance, so at the moment it's all just speculation.
It's not all just speculation. There's been some really good on-chain sleuthing connecting BNB balances to Binance wallets that have been declared as being controlled by Binance. And so, and again, we still haven't seen any refutation of this. So it looks like something between 80 and 120 million BNB are actually controlled by Binance out of the 150 million supply. So that looks a lot like Celsius. That looks a lot like FTX and FTT. It looks like it's mostly centrally controlled, heavily manipulated, thin float, and very easy to manipulate the price of this thing. And again, it was the Wall Street Journal that reported very quietly, because nothing had collapsed yet, but I just found this again linked in another article they put out today, pointing out that CZ actually controls the two major market makers that operate on Binance US. So, there is that same pattern of a printed out of thin air token that has no justifiable monetary premium and thus is purely a confidence game. Literally, that's the long version of con game, that props up BNB and also propped up FTT. And then you have this, this clandestine operation of trading firms controlled by the exchange, trading on the exchange against its customers. So I think that's what, Reuters did a great job. Their London team spent a lot of time and actually contacted a lot of these entities, contacted the various groups that were giving licenses of various kinds to Binance entities around the world, and found it to be very, very, very weak. I highly recommend that you guys link to that in the write-up of this so that people can check it out. But the Reuters report out from Monday or Sunday this week was really quite good journalism and worth a look.
There's also talk about potential commingling of funds. You've raised those concerns. You've, again, I mean, we don't have any proof of this yet, but in terms of Binance US, is it similar to FTX's
that one
specifically, version of
yes.
United States?
Yeah, that one specifically is just pointing out that all of these funds moving back and forth between FTX and between Binance US and Binance International, it seems pretty clear that Binance US is not a standalone company and that it's basically just a magnet for regulatory inquiry to basically keep regulators away from harassing Binance International. And this is what's been written about. It was actually a strategy internal at Binance called Project Tai Chi or something like that that's been written about a lot now. And that's why they set up Binance US. And then, of course, you have the executives that keep cycling through. Catherine Coley for a few months, Brian Brooks for a few months. Nobody will stay and run Binance US once they actually get to know what's going on there. And I think it's probably likely that we'll find out that it's purely just an arm that's completely controlled by CZ, and that is actually just a part of Binance International and doesn't conform to U.S. regulations. For better or worse.
I think it's important to ask these questions and demand some transparency in this. But we're out of time. As always, Cory, thank you so much for joining us. That was
Happy
Swan
holidays,
Bitcoin
Christine.
CEO Cory Klippsten.